Okay, welcome. Thank you all for coming tonight. We actually started at 6 o'clock in closed session dealing with personnel and contract issues. We're back in open session. The first thing I need is approval of the minutes from our regular meeting in May and our special meeting, which was also May.
Move approval of the minutes as submitted.
Second.
Julie, Mark? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Approval of the agenda, any changes?
Nope, that's right.
Okay. Need approval of the agenda?
So move. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Public listening session. This is one of the evenings that we can take comments about anything that people are concerned about. Any comments from our public? If not, we will move on to our administrative reports. Starting with board reports of things that any board members participated in the last month. Peggy.
I represented the district at the CISA 2 annual convention, which was held on May 16th of 2017, and that's in Whitewater. Had the opportunity to hear from the new CISA 2 executive director. His name is Jan Hanrahan, and he was actually then a keynote speaker at that evening, and really was reflecting on his way of approaching new ways of managing the business. There's been a new strategic planning process underway for the past several years in terms of what CISA does in terms of providing services in the areas and how they deliver. And so he's continuing on that and has kind of a design thinking perspective he likes to share. And I don't know if you've had a chance yet, Randy, to hear from him within the superintendent meetings. But he's actually quite energetic and going to hit the ground running. Comes with a lot of great business expertise, and one of the areas that they're going to be getting into is helping districts also with community engagement. So we'll see what actually they're going to do, what kind of resources or services they might provide in that area if we choose to add that to what we are currently have in our contract with CISA 2. But it's always interesting.
Thank you. Anybody else? I guess I would like to just say for the public, I had the opportunity to attend the Warrior Stadium, and I had the opportunity to personally meet many of the donors and thank them for their generosity. But I think we, as a kind of a school board and administration, I would like to thank our administrators, our facility committee, and all of the people that got the initial project going before the donors came on board, because that was really, it takes both parts to make that all happen. So thank you, Steve, Randy, facility, people that were involved in that. And then also graduation. I know that all of us were able, or many of us were able to attend that ceremony. And as we end another school year, again, I would like to thank all of the people that we have working in our district, the teachers, the administrators, but everybody, that it was, to me, another very successful year with achievements by our students and by our athletes and by our co-curricular programs and facilities that came on board. And again, another wonderful, successful school year, so thank you. Okay, so on to strategic planning report.
All right, strategic planning reports, you're going to see that there's 5 different items that we're going to touch on tonight. Many of these have had some level of attention at our committee meetings, but I moved them to the strategic planning report because they have a direct link to our strategic planning framework. And so tonight, these are ones that are probably just going to take a few minutes to touch base on each one of them, and there's additional work that will continue with our committees before some of these things get flushed out and get brought back as more of a formal update. The first one is with regards to the linkage meeting follow-up. We had the linkage meeting on May 1st that was focused in on the co-curricular programs across the district. And the goals committee took a look at the survey results that we had from our participants and attendees. And a few of the themes that we discussed at the committee level involved discussion about surveying of students per sport every year. That was a conversation Aaron May was also part of with the committee, and is looking at how to be more efficient at being able to provide that. There was also a large discussion around our approach and philosophy for co-curriculars. And you know, in our next strategic planning item, we're going to talk about priorities and performance indicators based on the boards and my evaluation. And one of the items that we have in there is around board governance and looking at how does the board work as a community leader. And one of the proposals for that was to utilize some of the feedback from this linkage meeting, particularly around who are we, what's our philosophy around co-curriculars, and potentially use that as a larger discussion point as part of our community engagement and community leadership aspect. So that was one of the dialogues that we had at the committee level that also tied in very closely with another strategic direction, which was putting together our board and administrative goals for the year. Some other things that we are taking a look at is how can we create clear communication about what we're currently doing. That was a piece that we learned from the attendees. Also, trying to think of ways we can create more voices. Even though we had some attendees at the meeting, it was still relatively lowly attended with regards to probably about 20-25 people whose voices were part of that linkage meeting, and how do we expand that to a larger extent? How do we help to position parents to have effective communication with coaches and our athletic director? How can we look at ways to just articulate what are the venues and how do we create that environment? There was discussion around some feedback from the committee with regards to staffing levels in the activity director's office with regards to middle school and high school. And then also we thought that the students did a really nice job at the linkage meeting, really defining their vision of a coach or advisor. And that some of those pieces may help to guide us as we have further conversation. When the goals committee was looking at how do we start to move some of these pieces forward, particularly the items around philosophy and larger picture, they're offering to really take an attempt to put together some structure as far as what that could look like, and wanting to put a structure together to bring back to the board to say this would be a potential approach for us to broaden this out to our community and have more voices and a larger discussion around the topics that I just summarized. So that was really the recommendation from the goals committee, was to have them dive deeper into this work and then bring back a recommendation for the next steps.
Randy, isn't this co-curricular? I mean,
It could be. I think that's a conversation that can take place around this table. If the linkage meetings have been part of the goals committee, and some of the work with regards to how we go about organizing some of that work has been really the role of the goals committee for the last year or so.
Right.
But certainly, if this was something that the co-curricular committee, if you're looking at it from a topical standpoint, they certainly could be part of that. And I think that's maybe a discussion that we can have right now as far as where is the best place for that planning piece or that next step piece to go. And certainly, if the goals committee organized that linkage meeting, if now that we have the data back, you want to move it to co-curriculars, that's certainly an option. Or it can stay
Well, I
with.
think, if you look at the goals committee, can put the flavor of the meeting together, but if it's facilities, it should go back to facilities. If it's, because really what you're doing is getting information from the committee, the community for specific topics that, the board has interest in.
Sure.
I guess one thought that it's, as I think over the past several years, as we've been talking about kind of the board governance model and the whole community leadership component, which is in the key works framework, understanding, we thought that taking this particular topic as a model of what we can be doing better in our leadership role kind of dovetails into something that whatever we learned from this experience using co-curricular could then be applied to other areas. Because when it comes to what our role is, one of them is, what role do we have in terms of being a community leader, like being proactive rather than reactive to all the questions. And some of the things that are possibly even discussed here is there a community survey culture? What role does co-curricular play in culture?
But then I guess I would question, why do we have committees? Because you have these specific committees to discuss these topics. And I've been talking about the coaching and the Waunakee way and things like that since I've been on the board, and that's exactly some of the things that have come out of the linkage meeting. So if you're going to do all of this kind of stuff, then we should just kind of move everything into the goals committee.
Well, the one thing, and maybe this is where, because topics like this come and go around and around the table for a while, and sometimes before we actually have a plan in place. Now, if we have a mini discussion, say at the community level, say, okay, taking this input that we're going to get here, and then bring it back, and maybe it becomes a special board meeting where we are talking about this particular topic. It's more of a framework of what's our role versus the administrative role is, and using this as a sample topic. Julie.
Yeah, and I guess I would kind of agree. I mean, I think this particular topic has so many fingers and so many webs to it, because you could make the argument too, one of the major focuses of the top 3 rotations that we did in that linkage meeting had to do with coach evaluation. So or advisor evaluation, I guess I would want to broaden it, not just coaches. So it was good to get input from the community on what they knew and didn't know about that process and be updated about how we're currently doing that. But you could also make the argument, some of that discussion, maybe that belongs in the HR committee, especially if we continue to emphasize wanting to use staff to do it. So I think it's got its fingers in more than one pie.
Well, I think what you do is you look at the linkage, and if you decide that it goes to HR, you put to HR. If it goes to co-curricular, it goes to co-curricular. If it goes to facilities, that's what you have the committee structure for. That's otherwise, why have the committees? Let's just have 2 board meetings a month and.
I think one of the things that we've struggled with is which committee do topics go to. And sometimes we've had it where 2 committees want it, and then we run it through both. And from my perspective, I would like it to have at least an ownership piece in one, so we've got some consistency with it. So I mean, this conversation, it depends on where you park it, Jack, because you're exactly right. Topically, from a co-curricular standpoint, it lands directly in the co-curricular committee. It's then the piece of, does this land there, or is this part of the board governance piece, which I would say is probably leaning more towards the goals committee. But I think Julie's point is there's going to be fingers in each one of our committees, so I think we need to choose one.
Mhm.
And that's where it needs to be owned as far as trying to move that dialogue forward.
Mark?
The same breath, I look at the linkage meeting mid-year with the drug alcohol piece. Clearly, there wasn't a specific goal, a committee that you defer that to. I can appreciate Jack's concern about this is a predominantly co-curricular thing. So perhaps when there is that kind of emphasis or involvement, that the two committees could work together in terms of structuring the next linkage piece, if there is a desire to do something like that, so that there's ownership within, I mean, from one committee to the next. Maybe that would be a way to, because this is could be potentially a huge area of discussion, and clearly, I appreciate what Jack's saying about the committee
Mhm.
having ownership for it.
So I guess from my perspective, what I would ask is that the discussion that came out of the goals committee was for it to go back to goals to put together a structure.
Right.
I appreciate what Jack is saying is that the topic lands directly within the co-curriculars. So I guess my question for the board is there a preference at this point from the board as a whole as far as which committee you'd like that planning discussion to start with or proceed with?
My preference would be goals, only because we would be looking at it like this, and co-curricular and curricular are two, I mean, I would argue also that curricular is just as important as co-curricular in this, because once upon a time, since I've been on the board, it was important to make sure that curricular and co-curricular were, sometimes you would have committee members on each of them so their voice was heard. It was basically what we offer as experiences for our students. And so depending on how you see the role of clubs and orgs and the sports side of curricular, of co-curricular, that is in and of itself a set of experiences that complements what we do in the classroom. So the question is, how does that lens come in? And so that's.
So then I would ask, what's the role of the co-curricular to, basically vote on the budget, on the fees?
Right.
Is that, I guess what we've got to do is define what the committee's roles are.
Right. And I think I think you're exactly right.
It's crazy.
I mean, because I think we've had that conversation around for a number of different topics as far as where do some of them belong. What I was just sidebarring with Joan about here just was if we jump ahead in the strategic planning agenda, and I think they just go hand in hand, so I'm just going to talk about that for a minute, was the priorities and performance indicators was really what came out of the goal setting from superintendent's evaluation and the board self-eval. And where this item fell within that was under the board governance piece, which was one of the areas for the board to focus on as far as what's our role within community leadership. And I think, Peggy, you sent an article out at our eval meeting that talked about the role of the board in community leadership type discussions. And following the linkage meeting, one of the conversations that I know I've had with Joan and with Peggy was with regards to, does the work and the follow-up from the linkage meeting around co-curriculars, given that it is such a large topic, does that fit within that fifth goal here, which is really defining community leadership? How do these things affect climate and culture in our community, focusing on the role of co-curricular and education programs? So I think the question then needs to be is, where do you want the work around that goal to begin and be originated? is that I think it can hit, as many of you have already articulated, all of our different committees, because there's an aspect of that that's going to touch all of them. But I think we should have one place that it's home as far as being able to drive that piece. I've also heard, is this something that, since it's a full board goal, does that have full board involvement around it? I think that there's many different flavors of how that can be structured. But I think the challenge is that we need to decide as an entity around this table of where do you want that to start, so that we're clear as far as where we need to be working to move that forward.
I'm more than happy to give it to co-curricular. I mean, that would seem to make sense as an appropriate place for it to start, but it's because of a whole linkage committee meeting that was part of our strategic plan of engagement with the community, why it ended up starting out big.
Right.
But for it to go back narrower now in committee work is probably appropriate.
Okay.
When you look at some of the items, like, you know, talking about a philosophy of a coach or advisor, looking at how to survey or survey kids, evaluate coaches, I think that can go back to co-curricular. As we discuss the next linkage meeting, though, if we're going to take it, I think then it has to come back to goals at some point if we're going to solicit more input, or if there's more information that we need to gather from the community.
Well, I think what might be interesting on these linkage meetings is, you know, coming out of committee, going to goals and say, hey, we gotta kind of organize a topic. You know, it might be facility, might be maintenance, might be athletics, might be, you know, the flavor, and then that starts laying out, you know, what are our linkages, what are our priorities, and you know that then the goals committee starts looking at where are we, you know, what are the goals that we want to achieve,
Sure.
you know, and that information kind of comes from the community level.
Peggy?
I think you bring up an interesting point when it comes to the roles of the committees and what are the right committees to have. This has been a topic that's been on the table for a long time. I mean, some districts won't have a separate, I don't think, co-curricular. Curricular is like a student offering, or some I don't know what the terms are. And the question around the topic of where does it go next has always been a frustrating one when it starts getting in the way of progress being made, because it has to go here and then it has to go here. Whereas maybe we have thinking out loud right now, a better way of communicating across committees that doesn't take a full board meeting, because there are a whole set of issues associated with, you know, what's more efficient, less efficient if you bring everything to the board level versus also the committees.
Well, what I've seen, you know, on the co-curricular, you know, we have like 1 or 2 meetings a year, and Erin May comes and gives the report, this is my budget, is it okay? You know, if that's what you want the curriculum committee or co-curricular committee to be, then you should just move that to the budget committee and let the budget committee review those numbers, approve it, and get rid of the co-curricular. Yeah. And you know, if the topic is, do you want to combine or change the committees, then we should have a discussion. But right now, the way we're structured, the co-curricular committee seems to make sense to you know, take this to the next level. And you know, I think we all come at it from a little different perspective, and you know, we all have good input.
So, curriculum or co-curricular, this goes to co-curricular now?
What we can
I
do
think it's
is.
in both. Every one of these committees is gonna touch the other one at some part. If HR does something, that they should go to budget before they get anything done, because that's not, they could be over budget or whatever. If you're on whichever facilities is the same thing, that's budget included too. You're gonna have some overlap in all of them. When you're doing a goal of what do you wanna do, what do you want your co-curricular involvement to be in the whole thing of how you do a school thing? There's ramifications both ways, so. And I understand your point, Jack, but a lot of the times in co-curricular stuff, it's dealing with smaller stuff than maybe always masses to the whole board. And yeah, you only meet a couple, 3 times a year, that's a nice thing. Versus every month or whatever.
What do you say, Gary?
Just saying, I'm salary, man.
Well, Gary, I'm just talking about balancing the,
I know, correct.
right, and,
And I think you have a point.
Yeah.
you know,
That's right.
Yes, yes.
so.
I'm not
balancing-
against it, I'm just saying they all intersect.
And then
Well, they
I
do.
think it would have to come back,
But there's 2 ways of looking at it. If the goal part is what do we want our goal to be in the mix of how we do that, that is goals. How you exactly do it, that is co-curricular. There's lots of committees that do
Yeah,
that.
basically what happens is after there's approval of a performance indicator, like, you know, how are we gonna automate, then an action plan's put together and like boom, 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 these are the steps and maybe another step. I mean, it goes to the co-curricular for this, it goes to HR for something else, or it goes to goals to help flesh out survey possibly. I mean, I don't know. Depends on the goals.
There's a couple ways we can do this. I mean, when we take a look at, and we're going to get to our kind of our 90-day outlook in a bit, between now and our July meeting, there's not going to be room for goals or a co-curricular meeting. So as far as having to decide this tonight, I don't think that necessarily needs to happen. One of the pieces that we are looking at from the priorities and performance indicators, which is the next item on our agenda, is I believe, Joan, we were looking to adopt those next month. Is that what we had talked about?
next month with the evaluation
Right.
form that we handed out last month.
So I think, and if that were to move forward the way it is presented tonight, it does set us up for one of the board goals being the community leadership around co-curriculars. At which time then we can determine that, kind of what our next steps are with that, and being then, once that's adopted, that could move to co-curriculars to flush out what that next step is. Does that seem fair? I think it's kind of leading to what Jack is saying. It formalizes, I think, what Peggy's saying is that once we adopt these priorities, then we can parcel out where that work goes. And I think we're looking to adopt these next month. Fair.
Questions? So the evaluation tool that we handed out last month and the performance indicators that are in board book this month, we're going to adopt next month. Got it.
I just have a quick question. At our last, from the minutes of this meeting, Rebecca, if anybody had any comments on the form that was handed out, they were supposed to share any input they have via like email or something else to Rebecca, and then action to adopt would come later, which is July. And so I just want to remind people that that was what the request was, because if there are any changes, we've got the draft and can make the changes or discuss what the changes should be. So I don't know if you've heard anything, Rebecca. Okay.
I think this is a really good discussion, because I think it's the one piece that we need to flush out as far as where we move some of these priorities and these works in the committee structure. And I think some of the things that you're bringing up, Jack, I think make some sense with regards to if we're going to set a goal of that magnitude, it should be parked in a place that has that level of attention. So.
Yeah, and I like the idea of sharing the load more. Because co-curricular doesn't do very much work.
Right.
Anybody else?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, and even if you think about the roles now, I mean, like even goals, taking the process and they're getting at least to this point, and then it goes from there, that's probably the way goals should be.
Right.
Probably.
Okay, interesting.
Okay. The facilities?
So why don't I just move on, just for the other there were a number of other priority pieces. This one, before we skip over that, this really, what has taken place, and the Goals Committee did review this, was looked at what the priorities were, and then there was a recommendation for performance indicators for each of those specific priorities. So was there any, if there's any feedback on any of those, that's I think what Peggy was talking about too. Please let us know that prior to the next meeting. But wanted to let you know where those all came from. Those were pieces that primarily Peggy and I drafted. We ran them past the Goals Committee for feedback, so what you're seeing has come through that process.
And that comes as a request that came out of our discussions in our evaluation meetings where, well, we need to have some kind of indicator so that next year, how do we know if progress has been made?
Perfect.
And this was our crack at it.
Great. All right. All right. Now moving on to strategic planning update. Rebecca, if you can pull that item up. Steve, can I just ask you to walk through these? You did a nice job walking those through with the Facilities Committee. These were just some of the items that we had discussed at the Facilities Committee, and we shared with the board last month that we were going to be vetting out with them at our last meeting, and then bring them back here so you can understand exactly what our next steps are with regards to the strategic planning area with Joe's long-term facility maintenance.
Okay, thank you, Randy. So at the last facility committee meeting, we took about an hour looking at these 7 key questions that were identified the month before. Administration followed up with each of those key questions with statements in bold. Those were our interpretations as far as what we believed we heard from the facility committee, as well as what we had believed from the previous board meeting when the strategic planning update was shared. So we did go through those bold statements for each of the 7 items. There was, some, based on what we had shared with the committee, we received quite a bit of feedback on direction for moving forward. And we thought it was important just to take a couple minutes and make sure all of the board members were aware of the discussion. The first one really gets at the crux of, if you look at our strategic plan, there's a long-range facility box and there's a facility maintenance box. And we're really trying to define what belongs where. And so we wrote an answer to question 1, which really tried to define what ends up in which plan. The facility committee members agreed that put us on the right path, but certainly talked about there was going to be crossover between those 2 plans. But as far as a general way to describe them, the committee was in agreement with the way that we had written that up. The second question really regarded when do we want to engage our key partners in the process. As an example, we're using Westfall across the district for electrical. So we had our recommendation to engage those key partners only when appropriate at this point to gather that additional information. Question 3, we thank the board members who had better memories than me, who remembered that we put a policy in place that answered that question, and was probably wondering why is Steve asking that question. So thank you for having a better memory than I did on that one. So that one's already been answered in board policy. Number 4, we spent quite a bit of time talking about this. This is really a funding strategy where after discussing it with the committee, what we're looking to do is to build up a balance in our Fund 41, which is our account that we use for maintenance projects. And what we're recommending is that the Fund 41 balance for the 17-18 year of $509,000 remains unspent for 3 years. by not spending those funds for 3 years, we'll end up with over $1.5 million separated into that account that can be used at the board's discretion for projects in the future. In addition to that, we were recommending that the summer projects, which you will see later on in the agenda tonight, for the next 3 years be funded towards the fund balance account that the board has designated for 2014 operational referendum funds. And what we mean by that, the 2014 operational referendum was phased in over 4 years. And the first couple of years of the phase-in, we had funds available that were not expended. At the end of the year, the board took those funds and designated them into a certain location in our fund balance to hold them for a later date. In effect, what we're doing with recommendation number 4 is we're building up a balance in our Fund 41 for maintenance projects while we're drawing down on some of the funds that we've built up in Fund 10 over the last couple of years. So it's really a funding strategy in the end to increase the amount of money in our Fund 41, our projects fund. Number 5, we agreed with the facility committee that a discussion around this topic is important, but we really need to develop the long-term maintenance plan and really have a strong understanding of what that looks like before we commit to some funding level. But I think there is an agreement with the facility committee members that prioritizing Fund 41 in maintenance programs in the long run is in the best interest of the district. Trying to move away from the traditional public school model, which is maintenance via referendum, trying to move more towards a funded model where we're putting money away to take care of, many of our maintenance related items. Number 6, we had quite a bit of discussion on number 6. This is regarding the energy conservation topic, and should the savings from the Bethel Circle loan, which the board agreed to pay off earlier this spring, be shifted to create an energy conservation line. In the end, the facility committee feels it's too early to make that decision. The state budget process is moving along quite slowly at this point, so we really don't know where that's going to end up. And so we're recommending at this point, we're just going to hold on before we move forward. The committee agrees that there's a wide range of possible uses of those savings. Energy conservation might be one of them, but there certainly could be other priorities of the district. I know Dave brought up the point that in many cases, energy conservation projects pay for themselves, and so maybe we wouldn't necessarily dedicate a line item towards that. Maybe we would look at our contingency as an example to pay off a lighting project because it would pay itself off over time.
To that point, energy pays for itself. Could you create that line item and those anticipated savings go into that line item?
Absolutely.
Because then you've got money, to support other activities going forward.
That would be called recycling.
It would be creating a green fund. It would be creating
The green fund.
And yes, we can do that, Jack, so thank you for that feedback. Mary?
Just to comment on item 5 when we go back to that too. A lot of the money that was put in Fund 10 was some of the designated referendum stuff that was going to go towards our, like Fund 41, or projects to fix school stuff. So that was built up because it didn't get to Fund 41 at the time because of how that whole system works. So the money was set there. The other thing with the facility stuff, as we looked at his list, and we'll all get to see that better later with a better timeline of when some of that happens, it's a scary list. And it makes you nervous. So that's part of why the buildup on that is going to be important, so that we're set for our whole plan to do that. So and there'll be some good numbers coming hopefully on that to give us all a better look at. We didn't see that all now, but when you start looking at Joe's list, just as a 5-year picture, it's a scary list that you worry about being underfunded going forward.
The big conversation with the facilities committee is we put in there a marker of $50,000 per year. And is that the right number or not? Once we have the plan laid out where we can articulate that, and it really plays into the last question here, I think it was question 7. Everything goes into this plan. Once we get a sense of all of those pieces in the plan, we can come back and revisit that number and decide, is that the appropriate number to have in there on an annual basis to continue to build it up. If you can go back to the previous question before. Yeah, I think one of the things that I just wanted to articulate, because that was a question at the facilities meeting, this is the 300,000 plus Joe's summer projects budget. That's how you get to 509. So by taking those dollars, so actually the dollars that we can place into Fund 41 on an annual basis is the 509. And so if we continue to put those dollars there for the 3 years, that's how we get to the 1.5. What Gary's talking about is the dollars over the last few years that we put into fund balance that we haven't used from the exceeding the cap referendum that we earmarked for facilities, and the facilities committee would like us to utilize those first. So if those can be utilized, the Fund 41 can then be set aside, which has specific legislation that you can only use that for facility maintenance projects. So when we get to the summer projects list later on in the agenda, that is coming out of those dollars from the referendum that we designated within our fund balance.
Mark?
Steve, are you aware if one of the budgets provides for a matching from the DPI for a certain amount of money for Fund 41? Is that the governor's budget, or is that one of the, because I thought it was like 55,000 or something?
Yeah, there is a proposal in what's called Fund 46.
Okay.
So we don't have a Fund 46 right now, but Fund 46 was created to allow school boards to segregate money that they can't use for any reason for 5 years. So one of the proposals floating around out there is to provide some matching for that. We don't have one of those yet because we have not necessarily put funds away that we were going to know we could not touch for 5 years. But there is discussion surrounding that, and in the event that something were to pass in that realm, it certainly would make sense for us to take a look at it.
I think it's interesting. So you could, if you knew, as we build our Fund 41, can you take monies from that and put it in 46 and get a match? If you knew it was for a project that was 10 years out?
It depends on how that legislation shakes out, but it's
Yeah.
possible.
So if you, which is what Fund 41 is going to be, we're saying we might have this at year 5, we might have this at year 7, we might have this at year 8. That's why we're saving that. If you can do that, that's an easy way of doing that and getting a match of some funds.
I'm not sure they'll let you do that.
What, no shell game with the government? Are you crazy?
Thank you.
It's all a shell game.
Joan? Yeah, I just want to compliment the committee and Steve for this, because I know when, the question came up, the reason we set up Fund 41, and the reason there are many people in this community who were, I'm sure, waiting for the opportunity for us to do something that we said we were going to do, and we're not doing it anymore. And something like recognizing that $300,000 needs to be going into something like Fund 41 recognizes our commitment to, being true to what many people in the community, and everybody has to plan for something in the future. And to the extent school districts weren't doing that and had to go to referendum every time for stuff we knew was coming, it starts eroding some of that confidence in how we're using taxpayer dollars. So, way to go! I like it. Julie.
And I guess I would just like to add, and taking on to Gary's comment about Joe's list being a scary list, I guess I look at it just the opposite. What we know about is not scary. So the fact that we now even have a list, which several years back before Joe, we never had lists. We just waited for something to break and then, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? So I find it very reassuring that we have a list so that we can plan appropriately.
And I think the piece that we've had some pretty lively facility meetings. So I think part of that has been very healthy with regards to starting to lay out the framework that we're coming to. What I've seen with regards to on a bigger picture as we've had more of these dialogues at committee levels, We've identified what some of our priorities are. We've been able to identify what some of our frameworks that you want to see. What are some of those primary tenets you want to see in some of the work that we're moving forward? It's really helping us do a better job with kind of meeting some of the strategic initiatives we have. So I think we sometimes talk about what input do we get from the board that helps us shape what we're doing administratively. This is a great example, and I see more of this occurring as we continue to have these discussions.
Good. Okay, any other discussion on that? So 90-day board outlook?
90-day outlook, just if you what I've played, this is certainly not complete. I think that at this point in time, and this time of the year, this will continue to grow. But just to give you an idea of really what's going to be occurring this summer, and there's going to be a few items that we'll kind of scroll down, because those are all, it's nice to see ones that are scratched out. I just
We've
went
done
and did
so
the,
much.
we did the, yeah.
We've met so much.
We've met a good bit, yes. I told Rebecca we should count up how many times we've been together. But starting off here tonight, some of the items that we are looking to take place is following up on the Innovation Center report to the curriculum committee. That'll probably take place in the July-August timeframe. There's a few pieces that Tim and I are working with Jeff Willower on, but we want to bring back a report of kind of what's happening, where is that program going, and what are some things that we see on a growth level, some challenges that we're seeing, and then also what the future may hold. The next budget committee meeting, which will be taking place here probably in late June, early July, one of the items on there will be wellness clinic financial update. That's something we talked about with the board in March, so that'll be something to be looking forward to. The HR committee, as you take a look at one of our goals that we are going to be setting from our strategic priorities, we'll be looking at really the salary benefits aspect of all of our employee groups. That conversation will begin here in the June-July timeframe with really starting to plan out what we want that work to look like. It obviously has already begun in some respects with the QTI study that has to be seen through, and then some other areas of our employee groups that we need to really put some more concerted efforts to, and that will most likely begin with us really identifying our priorities and identifying some of those guiding principles that will help guide that work. Facilities committee continues to work through some of the items that we've just covered. We have some reports that will be coming with regards to North American Mechanical, and then the format for the long-range plan. We want to make sure that we stay tight on what those are going to look like. The next board meeting in July, the strategic planning report, I just want to review where we've been this past year. I'll touch base on many of the main points of our strategic plan and give you an update on what that looks like. And then I'd like to plan out what the strategic planning reports will look like for this next fiscal year and next school year, so that we have a view of where we're heading and what reports will be taking place every month. Not that they can't change or we can add things, but at least gives us a map to show where we're going. The goals committee is obviously going to continue to work on some of these pieces related to the goals aspect. We talked about co-curricular committee. We can add that in here probably in the July timeframe, August timeframe to start their work on some of the goal aspects. Policies, I know we have some policies that need to come back through that, or need to start their process through the policy committee, and I'd also like to reintroduce the topic of should we be looking at a contracted service for our policy services. There's some different options out there from Neola to the School Boards Association, and we can decide if we're happy with how we're currently operating or if we want to look at a different model as some other districts have. And when we start to hit August, the slide to start of school comes very, very quickly, and we'll be right back at welcoming our students back. So kids left on Friday, and you can see within the next 90 days we're already starting to look at when they're returning. But that at least gives you an idea of some of the things that will be taking place over the next month. I think our biggest piece in the next 30 days is going to be just when I looked at our calendars of when I know many of you are gone, when many of us have vacation. I think we have a total of 3 days between the next board meeting that we actually have open that we need to fit in a couple meetings. But other than that, we're going to have to move some things to July and the August timeframe. Yes.
Will board members be invited to attend the PLC workshop?
Certainly, that's going to be the PLC workshop will be part of the beginning of the school year, so absolutely.
So if that's the case, I would certainly encourage anyone who hasn't been able to go down to Lincolnshire, if you could at least make one of them, it would really be worth your while. So try to schedule it in. I know it's hard to miss a day of work.
Yeah, the Louis Cruz PLC workshops, there'll be opportunities even if you can't take an entire day to do it, because there'll be opportunities where he'll be presenting to a large group, and then there's also going to be breakouts within the schools on very specific things that they want to work on. So when we get closer to that, Tim, you and I can work together and see how we can communicate that out to the board members and what might be most beneficial to them.
And that's in town, that's local?
That's it.
Is
We're hosting them.
Awesome.
Also, for your information, a year from this summer, the PLC Institute will be at Monona Terrace.
Wow.
So instead of going to Lincolnshire or us going to Waunakee, it'll be at the Monona Terrace.
Wow.
So that's, I think, been an effort of some of the members of our administrative team. I think Sheila's had some conversations, Tim's had some conversations of trying to share that there's a lot of that work happening in our region, and that trying to see how we can leverage that. And they took a look at it, and they're going to give that a shot. So hopefully that'll be well attended here in a year. So summer 2018, that whole institute will be in Madison. So, but that gives you an outlook of really where we're headed. And like I said, once we get in the next number, probably after the July meeting, there'll be some additional items that'll get filled in.
Great. Any questions? The wellness clinic.
Yeah. In your packet, you will find a written report outlined from Connie. Connie is on vacation today, so Steve and I will just handle kind of the report that she provided. What she had done is just put together some of the basic information about the visits that have taken place in April and May, the types of visits. She's also added in just some duration. They've been keeping some tabulations on the average length of their visits. So you can see in April you had 78 total visits, May you had 76. The average length was between basically 40 to 45 minutes. I had one of my kids went through there and had a great experience, very thorough. I was very pleased with the service they received. And I think you can see that as well on the patient exit surveys, that they have felt that this has been something of very high value. Some things that Connie has also been part of is she was part of an HR contingent that went and visited some of the other clinics that are in schools around the state. They were in West Bend, Sheboygan, and Oshkosh. I think she felt coming back from that we're very well positioned here at our clinic, but there were some things that she has as a takeaway that she wants to bring back to the meetings with Dean, with Susanna, and just see if there's some things that we can be kind of learning from others that are also in a little bit further along in their journey. One of the things Connie and I talked about was just providing an update similar to this on a monthly basis. I'm not sure I'll tie it into the board agenda. I may just have her either give it to me and I'll send it out with one of my weekly reports to you, or I'll have her send it to you directly. The other piece that she attached for tonight, is for your information, are some of the correspondence that go out to staff. She didn't copy all of them. She just gave you a flavor of the types of different materials that are sent out to staff, usually on a weekly, probably a more frequent basis than that, just with updates as far as what's occurring within the clinic, opportunities, some health-related information, educational pieces from our nurse liaison, etc. So,
Mark.
So do we have a number that we at some point are hoping on a monthly basis to reach? And so 78 looks okay, but what does that mean? And so did Dean provide this is a goal, how many we'd like to have on a monthly basis?
do you recall that conversation at all?
So we didn't have monthly goals, but we had a goal when we presented our clinic metrics as far as evaluating
Right.
them. We were hoping that 25% of our total membership would participate in the wellness clinic. And from the data that we were able to research, that was a good goal to have in year one. And we were hoping that 5% of our staff would participate in wellness initiatives. Now that, of course, was brand new to the whole Dean system, so that goal was a little bit lower, but those were the two goals we set on an annual basis. We did not break it down to monthly levels, but generally speaking, we were looking at it in those percentages of the overall, participants in the health plan.
Gary?
To your point, there's a number with this. I mean, I just did math real quick and said if it's 45 minutes a visit, you can do 200 a month per hours. So to me, there's a lot of room to add to that. This only works if our people use it.
Amen.
Because the idea is wellness for our people, which is great, but also that it reduces your healthcare bill, which is what this is all about. So, and if it doesn't do that, and I didn't look at all the correspondence, and I hope they're getting them out there. And that'd be interesting to ask Cindy, is the discussion with this and the use with this very positive and going? And
It is.
I mean, if we don't have good participation after 2 years and you're going and our rates are still going up 8%.
I think we have, I'll just, since you addressed me directly.
Yeah.
We also had amongst the staff conversations about, that's April and May. Our illnesses occur in flu season and during
Sure.
the winter, and I think those numbers will be a whole different ballgame during those. Teachers don't take sick days, we don't leave in April and May no matter what, unless our arms cut off. So I think the numbers will be different.
Well, but I'm looking at this from the standpoint of hours and
Well, yeah.
how we're
Yeah, that's
available
my
and
question.
what we're
Yeah.
doing. And as I saw with some of the summer hours and what they're doing, if we're not available, they're just gonna go the regular route and then we're not achieving our goal. So I know they're working at it and it's an ongoing thing and we just need to keep getting more and more, we need to get use out of that, so.
Julie?
So to that point, and to add on to that point, I did think it was really good in the communication that went out with staff already, notifying them well in advance, days that the clinic planned to be closed in July. So there again, as a reminder that, athletic physicals, school physicals, and vaccinations were one of the things we were really hoping to accomplish with this clinic. It will take some planning on staff's part to recognize that it's, I don't blame her for taking vacation, and it makes sense to do it in the summer, but on the other hand, I hope staff plans far enough ahead, because if you do divide these numbers out, that's only 4 or 5 patients a day,
Yeah.
which I gotta say, that's really expensive for only 4 or 5 patients a day. So we need the people to use it to make it worth it.
I wonder how expensive it is, though. When you consider those 4 to 5 patients went to a clinic where we rented a base rate, and you have 2 people in there, I think, on a regular basis, where if I send them to Dean Clinic and there's a doctor they're going to go see, and then there's a PA that they see before that, and there's a receptionist before that, I wonder how much each one of those visits actually cost us. I got a funny feeling those visits are significantly cheaper per hour than a visit to a regular clinic. I mean, that'd be a number that would be interesting to see, but again, it doesn't matter in the first 2 months. It matters across the year.
Correct.
And it matters across your total health insurance claims.
Correct.
Whether they go up or down.
Right.
But this clinic, I'm sorry, you go in there and you see it, and the staffing level it's at is significantly less than the staffing per hour at a regular UW or Dean clinic.
True, but
Because you don't have a full doctor, and you don't have receptionists and all that other stuff that you're paying for. Over and above, the overhead at a regular clinic would be significantly higher per hour.
Mark.
Then 2 points. One, I think it's really paramount that we continue or even accelerate the marketing with our staff so that the clinic becomes the first thought for going to versus, oh yeah, we could have gone to the clinic.
Yes.
I think that's an important piece, but as a board member, then I would like to see numbers that mean something when they come in. 78, and I'm not trying to be critical, 78 doesn't tell me anything, except how many were there. And so if on our monthly report, then if we could have something a little bit more helpful from a metrics perspective, whether it's, okay, that number falls in financially to a plus for us, or we're really lagging, that would be very helpful to know as a board member.
Or like how many of those were
Rather
actually,
just a raw number
Right.
that means,
so how many of those were like working on the biometrics that were tipped off from the earlier screenings, and how many of those were related to, you know, an urgent care type of visit?
To that point too, that should show up in our insurance meetings, right?
Yeah.
A little bit, hopefully you're gonna see visits drop or whatever, so.
But
There would
you're
be
not
a
gonna see that for
roundabout way of
months.
seeing it that way too.
You won't see that for months after the actual event.
I get it,
By
but
the time it gets
eventually
through
you
the
should see
system.
that.
Yeah.
My only point, I'm not being critical either, I'm just saying if this is gonna work, we need to get it used.
I
Exactly.
agree.
That's,
It's not a benefit if they don't take advantage of it.
yeah.
So, but you can, we will share that information with Connie so that we can add some of those pieces to future reports. And then we will be including those on a monthly basis. You'll see them probably mainly emailed out when I send out my weekly report.
The report was helpful though, so thank you.
Yes,
That's good.
and I appreciate having that monthly, I think that will help. Okay, administrative reports, the audit engagement letter, do you have any comments on that, Steve?
Just to share with you, our new audit firm, Wagner CPAs, requested that the board members be provided a copy of the 2 letters that you saw in board book. It's strictly an informational item. They just wanted to make you aware of it. They're actually coming next week, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday to do a preliminary audit, and then they will be coming back the second week in August. So this is just a letter to them, a letter to you, and then also to me as far as what it is that they're going to be doing, just included for your information.
Any comments or questions about that?
I did find it very interesting reading. And I was kind of interested how different your letter was from our letter. And I will just say it concerned me a little bit because it sounded like we're going to do this, but we're not going to do that. And there was way more, we're not really going to be responsible for that part than I would have hoped for. But we'll see how it goes. I'm happy we turned the page and at least we got the letter. So.
Okay, any other concerns? Okay, on to committee reports, starting with budget. Gary and Steve. Gary, Steve.
There's
show.
lots of pages.
Well, I've already learned tonight that Gary thinks we meet too often.
No, I didn't say that. I just said I'm salary.
So we have a number of action items tonight from the budget committee that we're bringing forward. Several of them are just items that we typically do during the month of June. An example of that is the first one, 2016-17 budget changes. There is a document that's attached. The format is required by the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. We have to follow that exact format. It has to be published in the paper after approved by the board. The important thing is really what's in those numbers, which is really described in the paragraphs above the attachment that really shares what it is that's changing in the budget. The overwhelming majority of those items you are already well aware of. An example of that would be the board taking the action to pay off the Bethel Circle loan. So other items like that action was taken by the board after the date the budget was approved. Those items are needing to be updated. Other examples that you wouldn't specifically be aware of is grants change. So as an example, we received notifications of the carryover amounts for the federal special education grants. We didn't know about that in October, so we changed those budgets. Salary budgets needed to be modified after the Board of Ed approval in November of salaries. So you see the list of all of the items that are there. They're put together in that budget change document. The budget committee did review those changes at the last meeting and did recommend to move that forward for approval at tonight's meeting. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about that item.
So we do need a motion to approve that.
Motion to approve as presented.
Second.
Any other discussion on the budget changes? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, second
Okay,
draft.
thank
of
you.
budget.
In the budget planning process, we have 3 drafts of the budget that are presented to both the budget committee and then the board members for your consideration. In June, it's the second draft of the budget. In July, we will be presenting the third draft of the budget, which will be carried forward to the annual meeting in October. So in the notes, you will see there are 7 items that were delineated out that indicate the changes between the first and second draft of the budget. We did review all of those items with the budget committee members at the last meeting. After reviewing that, the budget committee did make a motion on a 3-0 vote to move this budget, the second draft of the budget, forward to the full board for consideration this evening. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about that document.
I always have a fun number that I find somewhere. Page 3, which is the board members. I think some of the terms are wrong.
I already brought that to his attention.
Oh, I'm
too.
sorry.
No,
That's good.
no, that's good. We moved some of the board members around and I think we missed the terms. So
Some of you have to
Peggy
run
did
for
let me
office
know
a
that.
lot sooner than
That's
you
what I
expect.
thought. That's, yeah.
Some of you get
So,
to wait a
yes.
lot longer than you expect.
Yes, thank you for Peggy let us know that too, so I appreciate that.
It
So-
shows we're reading it.
Yeah. So we need a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the second draft of the budget? So it was Mark and Jeff. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
So last month, the school board approved a lease this summer with the Wisconsin Youth Company. And this month, we're bringing back their annual leases during the school year. So the Wisconsin Youth Company rents spaces in each of our elementary schools. Dane County is renting a space and they're moving over to Heritage Elementary School. And the new teacher project is renting space and they're also moving over to Heritage Elementary School. And we are recommending to increase the cost for the Wisconsin Youth Company from $2,400 to $2,450. Dane County, we're recommending continue at $75 per month, and the new teacher project, we're recommending to continue at $300 per month. The budget committee did review this information and is recommending approval of the leases for the 17-18 school year.
Move approval of the lease agreements as recommended.
Second.
Go ahead.
Any discussion? Yes.
That means they're freeing up some, with the movement of these businesses or organizations to Heritage. Does that mean that there's a little bit more space for the other functions that the old TLC?
So as an example, the Dane County new teacher project was in the lower level on the side that the food service department is in, which is Taher, in the corner offices. So they are freeing up those locations, and we do have a couple of spots now open up in the lower level on the food service end. That if anyone did need a workspace, we do have a few down there still. Because the Taher folks are down there, it still doesn't make it viable for the special ed program to move over there as well, because it is still more of an adult office space, but there will be some spots open down there next year.
Gary?
So now that, I didn't think of it before that, now that if we're taking Heritage and we're moving them to them spaces, are we moving them to areas that are not classroom, or are areas that would be hard to have a classroom that we're doing that? Is that where they're going, I hope?
I think they're going in the upper area, correct? Upper.
Well, that doesn't mean it's I think of the dungeon or whatever as you call it, that's hard to use for whatever. Why wouldn't they go there? Then we don't, you're not gonna have to redesign for classes. Like, I hate to lose when you do anything where we realigned and we have extra classroom space there, that all of a sudden you burn it all up with other stuff, and then when all of a sudden you're maxed out and it should have held, I don't know, 700, and now it only holds 600.
They're office spaces.
Right.
They're not classrooms, they're offices.
That were there pre-existing.
Yeah, it's like what our social worker was and where our reading specialist was, speech and language.
But even at that, then when you have classrooms there later, those are offices that were needed for classrooms at the time. Is that gonna, I just say we plan and use that, right, at least so we don't have to redo later. I hope we're thinking that way. That's all I'm saying. I'm sure we probably are, but
The dungeon can't be used for a couple of these people because it needs to be accessible and there's no elevator that goes to the dungeon, but there is an elevator that goes to the top floor. So that's one of the issues,
Okay.
accessibility.
you know what I'm saying.
Yep.
Okay, any other discussion?
You didn't, not every school has a dungeon? Come on.
So we do have a motion on the table for that. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
They
fund
should.
balance.
The next item is an annual requirement for the board to approve the fund balance accounts that we're going to use prior to close of the fiscal year. The attachment indicates the accounts that we are currently using. We're not recommending any changes at this time. The budget committee did recommend approval of the fund balance classification.
Move approval of the fund balance classifications as submitted and recommended.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Business insurance bids. Earlier this spring, I did seek some feedback from the budget committee on how did we want to proceed with our business insurance quotes for the renewal period on July 1st. We talked about a couple of options. One was just renewing within our local agency hub. Another option that we talked about was going out to the market to look at some competitive proposals. In the end, the feedback from the budget committee was go out to the market, look at some competitive proposals. That turned out to be a great decision because by going out to the marketplace, we received very strong proposals back. Those proposals were attached under the document labeled insurance bids. So we did receive very competitive proposals. In fact, they were, the net difference was within $1,000 roughly of each other. Very strong proposals received. There were some differences in the policy limits between the proposals. At the discussion, the budget committee level, HUB was the lowest bidder. HUB is an agency that you might formerly know as Murphy Insurance from Waunakee, was purchased by HUB, which is a statewide insurance company. And they did have the lowest bid, and the recommendation from the budget committee was to go with the proposal from HUB at the $245,144.
Move approval as presented.
Second.
Any discussion on the insurance bids? David?
I understand why using a local provider is generally preferred and stuff, but I mean, when I see things like the cyber liability, you have 500,000 with HUB and you have $1 million with the other provider. I mean, that's double the coverage, and for a cheaper price. And the idea of like social engineering, I gotta admit, I don't know what insurance there is about social engineering, but HUB provides no coverage whatsoever, where Marsh did. I don't know, I'm a little concerned over the fact that we're paying roughly the same. I got no problem with that, but we are getting, in some categories especially, significantly less coverage. And I don't understand why we would pay the same amount.
So we did go through that with the budget committee. The proposal from the Marsh agency from Eau Claire represents a large group of school districts that band together to bid out their insurance. It is a group that at one point in the past our district belonged to. We reached out to them to provide a proposal to us. In some of the cases, as you saw by looking at that, their policy limits are higher than what the policy limits are that what was proposed from the hub policy. In the end, the budget committee, in comparing those two, felt that the coverage that we receive from the hub proposal is excellent. It's what many schools, example, Middleton has the same policies we do. It's the same policies a lot of schools have. They've met all of our needs to this point, and the committee felt like overall for the bid that we put out, hub provided a response to us that met the requirements at the lowest cost. And there of course was discussion as well about the fact that they are a Waunakee, location. There's staff who work there who live in our community, and that does factor into the decision-making process as well.
Julie?
And we did discuss what you brought up, Dave, but I mean, some of the time, some of those increased coverages are because the risk of it happening really are so low. That's why they can give you that kind of coverage for extra big amounts, because do you need to be protected by something like that? What is that worth when the chances of it happening are that big?
And to Julie's point, in Wisconsin state law, there are limits on public school districts and what we'd have to pay out for liability, as an example. And our insurance consultant knows of only one case ever where in the entire state, when a group of students traveled to another state, where the limits, the higher limits that was offered by the Marsh policy would have actually come into play. So to Julie's point, that's extremely accurate, that they do offer those additional coverages, because it is not just remote, it is extremely remote, the possibility that would ever be tapped into.
I gotta say though, I'm looking at a lot of these categories. I mean, just auto liability. We send people around in cars all the time. They have a 2 million limit on Hub. It's a 5 million limit on Marsh, and then it's 100,000 per. Where in Hub it's 10K medical. I mean, you're seeing significant dollar differences, and you may say they're so remote, but then in which case, why isn't Hub getting close to what Marsh is doing if it's so significantly remote? And I don't know, I'm going to vote against it, mainly because if I was buying insurance for myself, if I was buying insurance for my union, I would be saying I'm not going to pay the same amount for less than half the coverage. It just doesn't make sense. And I understand it's a local company, and by God, if they were that close and it was a little bit of difference, but not when it's getting double the coverage in almost over half the categories. I just don't understand why we would do that.
Any other discussion? So we do have a motion on the table. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Nay. Or no, aye.
5-2.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Curriculum committee, I don't think there's any action items, but do we have anything we want to chat about? No chat?
No chance.
Anybody want to, any questions from the minutes you saw on the curriculum committee?
Just a comment, I've been reading the Horizon report for quite a few years, and it's a phenomenal report, and I'm glad that it's something that is kind of reviewed on a somewhat regular basis with the curriculum committee, so there's fascinating stuff going on.
I mean, that is the one thing I would say is the majority of the meeting was spent on 2 white papers. So one is the Horizons report, which Peggy referenced, which is kind of a long-term, short, medium, and long-term technology, instructional technology forecast. The other one was re-envisioning the 12th grade year with some of the shared with us by Madison College. certainly would recommend those to anybody on the board. And they're in board book.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Any other questions for Tim? Okay, moving on to the Goals Committee.
I think
Is
we
there
covered
anything else we want to say from the committee report?
We covered much of it during our strategic planning report.
Facility Committee.
We do have one item on the agenda tonight that does need action. This is approval of the 2017 summer projects. Again, this was one that Steve alluded to during the strategic planning report. The Facilities Committee visited some projects that, even though we are in the process of really finalizing the larger list of our facility needs, there were a number that we felt were important for us to move forward with this summer. These items were articulated, if you can.
I don't have it attached.
You don't have that one attached.
I can.
While
get
I'm
it.
talking, are you able to
I
do that?
think.
These are an item that we are actually utilizing the strategy that was put forth in the memo that Steve went through with regards to utilizing dollars from the referendum funds that we set aside within our designated fund and fund balance. So what you will see are really the higher needs areas that we need to address facilities-wise. You'll also see some equipment items in there that are also a priority for us as a district to move forward with and address. So what we are looking for, once Rebecca has this up, is to looking for approval of this so that Joe can move forward with these items for this summer.
And this was in board book. Is that
It
the
was.
one?
I think it was in board book, it's just not an item we're able to pull up right.
Didn't we do something with the high school pool area, changed airflow or something like that to make this boiler last longer?
We've done some things. We've done the UV system a few years ago. That's obviously been one improvement that we've done, but we certainly have continued to have some needs there with regards to the pool.
So are these years 2015, 2014?
That was when they were initially designated to be replaced, so they've been
Oh,
deferred
okay.
since then. And so what we are doing right now is trying to move those forward as items that have been put off in previous budget years.
Okay, so we put the pool boiler off for 2 years, and now it's the point we need
Yes,
to do.
correct. I think you can get it from quick view.
I don't think I'm already reading.
Well, that's majority versus, versus just.
Well, I think
Can
We've got it in board book.
we've got it in
I
board
think,
book.
does anybody need it pulled up? Everybody have a
It's a
copy
total.
in front of them.
This is
So,
332.
I think we are looking for a motion to approve this list.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Anybody want to discuss any other parts of the list? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thanks, Rebecca.
So we are at policy.
Policy. The next item on the policy agenda, last board meeting, Aaron May was here to present some changes to the facility use policy. We had quite a bit of discussion on that last time. There were no other changes that were recommended or heard from board members, so what you see in board book are identical to what you saw last month. So this would be the second reading of those, and we are looking for action on them tonight.
Julie?
Yeah, I did see one place where it said, so the category of resident user things needed to be the part that we're changing on Rule 830.
Yep.
Is number 3, and it says 80%.
Right.
And then when you go back and you look at user group classifications, it says 75%.
Okay. I think his intent is to move it to 80%, and that category piece is where it used to be, that was where that used to be articulated. It wasn't articulated in policy. It was kind of an administrative fee structure piece. So he would like it at 80%.
So shouldn't those tie?
Yes, those should be the same. So what we will do is correct those so that those are congruent at 80%.
That seems like really splitting hairs between 75% and 80, frankly, but.
Yeah, I think either one I think is fine. It was one I think that Aaron looked at what some other districts had done, and 80% seemed to be a trend. So, do you have a preference of those? I mean, I think you can really go either way. It's just really trying to set a number and having it in policy.
75% seems to be.
75.
I mean, isn't that easier to calculate in your head? I mean, I wondered if there was a.
We can set the number, and I know Aaron is fine with whichever it was. We had it at 75%. I think the whole impetus of this was to make sure we moved it into policy so that it held a little bit more.
So go to 80%.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Just so they tie.
Yes, we will tie them
Correct.
both together so that they're both 80%. Yep. Correct. Very good.
Mark?
I have no way of knowing the number, how accurate the numbers are and compare market value. I'm trusting Aaron's done that analysis, but it just did strike me that both the performance arts and the aquatic center numbers seem to be low compared to our type 2, type 1, even our type 3 facilities. And I wouldn't vote no to this year's schedule, but I certainly would want to be assured as a board that we've looked at all the fees for next year to make sure that they're in line with comparables in the area.
Yes, and I think one of the things that we want to do with the use fee schedule there is to bring that back on an annual basis. When Steve brings back as part of the budget process all of the fees, we want to bring these on an annual basis too. So these aren't specifically tied to the policy. These are
Right.
more of an administrative piece that we will improve on an annual basis. I think there are some things that we will continue to look at as far as those numbers. The PAC items often have other charges associated with them,
Okay.
depending on what they use and what kind of group it is. So that one breaks out in a little bit different way. He had some challenges just trying to categorize all these on one chart, but there are multiple pieces that play into what the fees would be for use of a facility like the PAC.
So can we do all of them at once?
It's actually just one policy, so
No, it
much
is
of that is just supporting information.
Okay, so we don't have a motion yet, do
No, I will move approval.
I will second that.
we? Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, consent agenda.
I'm going to ask if someone would please pull the IP phones for separate consideration. There's an item that wasn't attached that I want to talk about before you approve that.
Which one was this?
The approval of the IP phone system bid.
I recommend that we pull the IP phone system from the consent agenda.
I'll say. Just so I can agree with once you pull something out of the consent.
Thank you, sir.
Okay,
When's that ever going to happen?
so we're looking for
Randy's between us.
approval for all except that.
Yes, that's really what the
item
motion
that's
would be.
been pulled out. So we need a motion for everything except the IP phone.
I move the approval of the consent agenda except for the approval of the IP phone system bids and including the updates to the HR stuff that we did.
Okay.
Second?
Second to that. So any discussion on what we're voting on? Not the IP phones. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Now we can talk about the IP.
Thank you very much. The reason I had you pull this one out is I realized that there was an attachment not included with this agenda item. I've asked Herb, oops, I'm sorry, pass those down, thank you. What you see, when Herb was in front of us a couple months ago presenting his budget and his update, one of the items that we want to move forward with for this summer is the voice over IP phone system. it certainly is one of those items that will help us to reduce our cost for communication across the district per some of the Forecast 5 information that Steve has been providing. When we take a look at the bids that Herb actually received, you can see them from Presidio and Heartland at the bottom of your memo. A chunk of that, most of that is hardware. Hardware items all follow the state contract, so they don't need to come forward for approval from the board. But some of the contracting costs exceed the $25,000.
Correct.
So that piece does need board approval for us to move them forward. So your recommendation is Presidio. And
That's
I
correct.
just wanted to make sure you saw at least what that number was and what our rationale was for moving that forward and how it's being moved forward. It's really so that we can make sure that we are following our policy for an item with regards to the contracting aspect of this that exceeds the 25 grand.
Correct. There's an additional 3,000 savings on the Presidio, so it's really more like 166,000. That's because when I first had it bid, I bid it as 4 separate buildings, which it is. But when we're gonna buy all this stuff, we're buying it as one big bulk. So there'll be a savings not only in the purchase, but there'll also be a savings in the consultant time.
Yeah. Can you tell us what the consultant time is? Because that's really what's the.
It's
not the
about
time.
27,000 right now.
So
that-
can you break this, 169,000 is equipment plus consulting?
No, that's the total together. So minus 27,000 from that 100.
Yeah.
166 now, so.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Yeah.
It's hardware plus consulting.
Correct.
It's the whole
to
thing.
Yes,
install.
that's the turnkey, that would be the turnkey cost, was 166,000.
And then from a maintenance standpoint, you guys do that?
Yeah, the licensing and the rest of the management and the upkeep, yeah, that'll be my guys. And we've been doing that already for the 3 buildings that are void.
And what is the savings?
Well, number one, the savings are gonna be that we'll no longer be paying a monthly bill to TDS.
Right, and what is that number?
Steve would be better to answer that, but I know that when I was doing E-rate,
I think you calculated the savings somewhere around, was it 60%?
Yeah. Yeah, our monthly phone bill fluctuates between, I don't know, 12 to 15,000. So, you
Per
know,
month, and
Cut it in half.
that goes away.
in that, yeah, so all of that goes
So
away.
basically, in about a year.
Right, so,
It'll-
right, the return on investment is gonna be about a year and a half,
Yeah.
but then the savings will continue. So,
Understood.
so it's about a 60% savings on our communication budget. If you remember when I did my
Yeah.
presentation, we spend a lot more on communication.
Yeah.
Right. So just to clarify your question, Jack, for everybody, so the 166 is the number from Presidio, which is
Correct.
what you're recommending.
Correct.
27,000 of that is for the consulting fee, and that's what we need approval on tonight, because that's above the 25,000. The rest of the hardware is through the state rate as far as those items, and your
100%.
staff will then be installing those, and that's really that's a phone and a cord. is really
Correct,
what it
yep,
is.
exactly.
So can you get them down $2,000?
There you go.
So we don't have to vote.
So we don't have to vote.
Jack, we're already here.
We got you.
Let's vote then.
So, but if you're saying we're spending about, let's say 15 grand a month
Correct.
on phone, and we will cut that price in half, that's 7,500, or say 7,000, that's 84,000 a year. So it's gonna take 2 years,
Correct.
and we'd be at full recovery.
Right, and I mean, the phone and the internet are part of that too, so that's why it's, you know, about a year and a half, 2 years they pay back.
So is TDS
Way under the
supplying us
normal
our
Say that again?
internet? Does TDS supply us our internet service for the buildings?
They provide us with the transport, they really don't provide the internet service. Our internet service provider is Wisnet.
Okay.
We do lease lines from TDS. We will continue to lease lines from TDS that connect our buildings together. And those costs are $500 to $600 a month, so we'll continue to pay those. Eventually, you know, someday, Steve and I looked into it a couple of years ago when we were doing the referendum of burying our own fiber and owning our own network, but right now that's kind of cost prohibitive.
Understood.
Okay, so we need a motion for the IP phone system.
Move approval of going with the Presidio estimate bid as discussed and presented.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye. Thank you,
Opposed?
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was my error, I did not attach that to the agenda.
Okay, board business, legislative updates.
I think you're seeing a lot of things that are happening at the Capitol through your WASP updates that are coming through. I know that our letter that the board scripted has been sent with regards to the items that we had discussed with that. Now some of the education items are getting some attention, so we will be continuing to track those and monitor that progress. There's still rumblings that they will have a budget here sometime midsummer. We'll see if that comes to fruition or not.
What's the over-under on that?
I don't know. That's for sure.
Okay, policy 130.
Yeah, there was a request just to add, just for information purposes, policy 130 onto the agenda. This is the policy that really outlines all of your seats within the board. And there was a question with if we had someone from Middleton or Madison who were to run for the board, where would their seat fall? So when you look at the policy, it states that Middleton, Madison, and Westport would share 2 seats per the policy.
My question, I brought this up only because, our geography really doesn't change, but the annexation of sections of our geography, like Middleton annexed part of Westport, but it still used to be just Westport. And my question is whether or not, like we have like Springfield, Dane, whether we should be saying Westport region or Westport area. If by saying something just like Westport, what is that doing in terms of people who might be interested in running for the board, who might reside within the district, but they don't see anything that even resembles? And that was the only question.
Yeah, when I read the policy, I think the only reason we've called it Westport is that's just been what it's been called. I don't think policy states that I think we could title it Westport, Madison, Middleton, similar to how we do Dane.
I mean, I didn't know if there was something that you had to do to change it in, like, for voting purposes. I mean, because it's a seat. I mean, I don't know.
I think we define that, but I can look in to see if there's anything legally that is there with.
But I don't know,
regards
maybe
to-
there's not other interest among other people.
Yep.
It is the Westport region or Westport area.
It's a good communication piece. So,
Yeah, I
but-
think it's important, especially with Middleton and that big Bishop's Bay area. I mean, we have more and more people out there, more and more students out there, and I think when those Westport seats are up for election, it should be mentioned, Madison, Middleton, Westport.
Those parts of the district, and a lot of people might not even know that those are part of our district.
I will check, Peggy, to see if there's anything
But you know what I'm
from
talking-
from
I mean,
an
I don't
election
know.
board ballot
I don't
piece.
know.
I don't think there is. I think that's something we articulate, but I will double check.
But there was interest brought forward from the community several years back and through the annual meeting process to try to look at it and have those seats more in line with representation in terms of population or students in the district. So if we're relooking at that, do we need to relook at the whole thing then? Because at the time it was, is it representative that Dane and Vienna have a full seat compared to the other? So when it was last brought up, it was the majority of the population, the majority of the students still are coming from the village of Waunakee proper. So should the village of Waunakee proper have one more seat?
Peggy?
But that's a different topic. I'm just talking about not changing the seats or anything, but what we call it.
I guess I see it as related. I mean, no?
But what you're raising is basically something that can only be brought up at an annual meeting and petitioned by the voters if they wanted to change the apportionment of seats, which is that's what that question was.
Okay.
And saying that, I mean, there was a time when there was a request, I remember, there was a request to eliminate Vienna and add it to
And if you look at
And then
the
combine it
number
with David
today,
Springfield and something
the
else.
student population is probably tripled in the past.
Well, exactly.
That's maybe true.
You know,
I know it
has.
is.
It has. I mean, if you look at the development in
Yeah.
all of our areas, the question isn't seat
Okay.
apportionment. I'm just wondering whether we should be
The question that
labeling
came
it.
up was if we have an election that involves, let's use the Westport seat.
Right.
It's the way it's listed on the ballot and the way it's articulated is the Westport seat.
Okay.
And the question was, well, where does somebody run if they're from Madison or Middleton?
Correct.
And so
Okay.
taking a look at the board policy,
I see.
when I
It's a
was
different thing.
anticipating
Sure
when I
is.
first read the policy that it was not going to articulate those, and it very clearly articulates that those all share 2 seats, that the Madison, Middleton, Westport shares 2 seats. So the question I think you're asking, Peggy, is we've always titled it the Westport seat. Does that have any sort of, is that a legal title, or is that something and that's a question I'll ask from the
I didn't know
elections
what it takes to do that, or if there was even an interest in changing. I just know that
I get
that's
what you're saying now.
I
Yeah,
think
not
it's something
Got it.
we clear up, but I will double check.
Okay.
David?
I understand your question, and I think we're taking care of that. But I do think it does bring out an apportionment question in the sense that as we look at this, and you look at the date it was last looked at was 2002, 15 years ago. Middleton area did not exist practically 15 years ago the way it does today. And I see no reason, if we're looking at, aren't we soon here having our consultant look at school numbers again?
Yeah, this fall.
And I think we could very easily right now look at that type of account and look at just straight census count in that area, because I believe he kind of does that at the same time as part of it. And let's take a look at this and say, should maybe City of Middleton be 1 seat and Madison and Westport be a separate seat? Or do we need to look at a slightly different breakup because our population is different than it was 15 years ago? I mean, every other municipal or government is usually required to do it every 10 years. We haven't done it for 15. I think it would behoove us to use that study at the same time and look at that number and let the policy committee take a look at that and make a recommendation to the annual meeting. Maybe not this year, but at least next year.
I'm not saying against or for, but you're creating, and I don't know how they decided how that was set up prior.
That's right.
You have population as one issue, you have property tax as another issue. So
There you
it's
go.
a whole
There you
interesting
go.
thing. And I know that fell into it the last time when they're talking about getting rid of Vienna. They have maybe a small school population, but they have a huge impact
Tax
property
wise.
tax wise.
Yep, and
And
that's
there
the
should be
point.
representation.
That's
Good
It
point.
almost
That's the
fits
big-
into my
that
head
is
when
it.
you're talking about it as the electoral college versus
Correct.
the
yes.
population thing.
Correct.
There's a representation that should be allowed just for we're part of the whole system, not just because there's a mass in one area.
And
Because
that's
it's
fine.
property tax.
Hand
I
it
get
all
it.
to the policy committee, let them look at it for the next year.
I'm getting, it's just a different can of worms than just
Well, we
simply.
should understand the rationale though, one way or the other.
It'd be interesting to know
Yeah.
how it was developed to start with.
I mean,
Correct.
simple enough, we can look at how it's done. What are the numbers? Property tax, student count, population
Yeah.
on all 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then say, what was it back then, what is it today, and should we do anything? Or should we
Correct.
suggest anything?
Right.
It's not up to us, it's up to the annual meeting, but it doesn't make sense to wait
Look at the one
15
thing
years
and
and not look at it.
I get it.
Yeah.
Perfect example, somebody in the Middleton district over there off of Highway Q wants to run for the board, where are they running under?
That was
That-
my
that should be
my
different.
question.
Right.
Correct.
I get it.
That's easy.
Yeah.
But that's already in the policy.
Okay, good discussion. Future meetings,
All right, we already have facilities committee, is that on the 28th at
and is,
4:30?
4:30.
4:30. What I'm looking for is a budget meeting and an HR meeting. And Tim, are you looking for a curriculum? Okay. So let's start off with budget and HR. The dates, I have some from Connie. What does July 6th look like? That's a
Are you
Thursday.
looking for budget?
It's like a Thursday.
If I could do, I was thinking, is there a way we could do budget and HR almost back to back? if we did them in the morning? And Jack, you're part of budget.
Yeah, we
If
could
if we
do
did that one first?
Yeah. July
Does that-
6th.
Does that work for you, Steve, July 6th? So I'm wondering if we could do budget, which is Gary, Jack, and Julie at like, what's the time that works for you, Jack? 7?
I think we had it at 7:30 or something,
So the 6th is a Thursday, does that work for you?
Really, really good.
I have lunch from
I'll just
7:30 to
skip all day.
8:30.
Okay, how about,
What's the 5th like? Are people gone
the
the
5th?
I'll
5th
be out
doesn't,
here on-
5th doesn't work. What about the 7th?
7th
Friday?
would work.
Or the 6th at 8:30. I mean,
It doesn't work.
Oh, that's
for-
too late, right?
Yeah. Are
Does it
you
work,
on the
Jack?
7th?
7th.
What about, what if we did, what if we,
On the 7th we're talking about.
what if we did budget on the 7th?
mhm.
And we did that at 7:30?
Sure.
And
Then
how
we
long do
show
you
up
think
for
that
yoga
would
on
take,
the
Steve?
6th.
Mhm.
Is that an hour?
Hour and a half.
I
Okay.
can't do HR.
What's that?
I can't do HR.
Okay. Could we do HR on the 6th and
I
just
can
do
do
it
it
later?
earlier in the morning,
On the 6th?
on the 6th.
Is 8:30 earlier or not earlier?
How long, probably an
Hour?
yeah, okay, that could work.
So if we did 8:30 on the 6th, does that work for you? Julie?
I can do that.
So if we did, all right, so we'll do 8:30 on July 6th would be HR, and then 7:30 on the 7th would be budget. Right. Tim, you're looking for a curriculum meeting?
Are there any days that are particularly bad days for any of the three of you
When are you looking?
in terms of weeks? It could be the week of the 19th, it could be
July?
the week of the 26th, we could also do July 6th, I think.
I'm gone the week of the 16th.
Is this the one that you're looking to do with the Fab Lab, or this is a different one? All right.
Probably we're looking for 30 to 60 minutes tops. So 16th through when doesn't work for you, Mark?
That week I'm gone,
July.
July.
Oh, I'm looking for
Oh.
before the July meeting.
Oh, so like June 19th?
June 19th
That
would be,
week?
yeah, June
I'm gone
19th.
that week.
You're
Okay.
gone that week.
So how about June 26th?
Sure.
Could be whatever time of day to fit your needs, flexibility.
What does June 26th look like?
June 26th looks, afternoon I can
Okay.
do. Like, are you thinking like 3:30, 4?
Whatever works for the committee.
3:30, 4.
3:30.
3:30? Yeah. On the 26th? Fabulous. Thank you very much.
I think that's it.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor? No discussion allowed?
All who want to stay, feel free to sit.
It's not raining, good job.